Okay. No, go ahead. Use it. Fold it now. I'm never fold. Yes.
You said you got the clicker. You got the clicker. Okay.
I stole one back.
I just got
Yeah,
it.
nothing.
When you came down.
So
I would have stolen back from it.
I handed it.
Okay,
Just like
listen.
at the time.
Okay. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. You're gonna do it. Right.
Court is back in session.
It's gonna be warm in a minute. Yeah, just wait.
Well, it went out warm early.
No, it wasn't, Judge. It fit right over my head.
There was a moment or two where the heat was on. It felt pretty good.
Just now.
Oh, yeah.
We need obviously. She's on her way.
No. Right.
You get all the jurors? All right, very good. Let's bring the jury in.
All rise for the jury.
Can the attorneys approach?
Yes, sir.
Please be seated.
All right, very good. Madam, we are ready at this time. Excuse me, be seated, everyone, please. When we left off, the people had rested or presented their portion of the closing argument. I allotted them 2 hours. So they have 30 minutes left. In addition, I gave 25 minutes for rebuttal. So they have a total of 55 minutes, okay? What we're gonna do is, I was able to talk to the transportation people. Say, so let's do it now. Sir. We're going to 4:30 today, or as close to 4:30 as we can, because what I don't want to do is be unfair to one side or the other by not finishing this today. But the 4:30 will enable me not only to let each party finish, but to have some breaks. I don't think that they'll utilize all the time, but if they do, oh well, we have it done. tomorrow, we'll be here 9:30. Now let me explain what's going on. I will instruct you, my instructions are about an hour and a half. What does that mean to you? 4 of you will be eliminated. You will not be able to discuss your testimony with anyone because we may have to call you back for some reason. Friday, let's do it again. You deliberate on Friday, okay? You're gonna be here at 9, and you can go as much as up to 4 o'clock. Then if necessary, you will go every day after that, Monday through Friday. If you choose to go Saturday and Sunday, you'll be doing it by yourself, okay? And that's not allowed, okay? So that's how we're gonna go, all right? To the defense.
Thank you, Your Honor.
You may begin, sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon. On the 27th day of January in 2012, the Grosse Pointe Park Police Department announced that Robert Bashara, my client and Mrs. Diallo's client, was a person of interest in the death of Jane Bashara. Detective or Investigator Olson from the Detroit Police Department said that that term means the same thing to him as suspect. So since that day, nearly 3 years ago now, there's been a cloud over the head of Robert Bashara, having to do with him being the suspect in the murder of his wife. And there's been a target on his back along with that cloud. And he has been waiting all that time for this day, this trial that actually began more than 9 weeks ago, as his time of vindication, of the opportunity that he would have to have citizens such as yourselves come into this courtroom, listen to the evidence, scrutinize that evidence, and make a determination about what the truth is. Because that's what a trial is. A trial is a search for the truth, and the people that find that truth are you all, the jury, the citizens, the people that don't have any bias, that don't know anybody, that don't have any skin in the game, the people that come in probably reluctantly
Initially.
to sit and to listen, to observe, to take the measure of the witnesses, to see how one thing matches up with another, to use their common sense, their everyday experiences, and to come to a determination of what that truth actually is. And during the course of these past 9 weeks, up until now and until the end of today, you all are silent. You're not allowed to say a word. You can't speak in the courtroom. You can't talk to one another about the only reason why you're here, the facts and the evidence, the things that happened during the course of the trial. But once Judge Evans finishes her instructions tomorrow, then that's all going to change. And the only voices that are going to be important in this trial from this point on, or that point on, are going to be yours. You, 12 of you, whichever 12 are decided upon at the end by lot to be the ones who are the deciders of the facts. It will be your voice that announces whether the people have satisfied their very high burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt, or not, as to each and every one of the 5 charges facing Mr. Bashara today. The lawyers will be silent. Judges, all the witnesses are gone, and it will be your voice. You all will have the last word, unified, saying whether Mr. Bashara has been found guilty of any of these charges. He didn't know who'd come. He didn't know who'd be sitting in those chairs. But he knew, as sure as I stand here this afternoon, that if this evidence was exposed to the light of day, the case against Bob Bashara was shown to disinterested citizens, that he would be vindicated. He waited for this a long time, and soon it'll be in your hands. Now, in trying to figure out a good way to have you think about this evidence, and you've certainly seen a tremendous amount of evidence, and to interpret that and to measure it against that yardstick, the legal yardstick of proof beyond a reasonable doubt, I've given a lot of thought to what I could tell you to try and assist you with that. And what I remembered from a long time ago when I was a student in college, I had an English professor when I was a freshman who talked about, in English literature, the characters we read about, the stories that we had to read, the books, the novels that we had to read. Every story, every book, every situation that these characters faced, they were always faced with this dilemma that he taught us about, which was knowing the difference between what really is and what merely seems to be. And I didn't understand that when I was 18. But as 40 plus years have gone by, I have come to understand that what he was talking about is something I apply in my everyday life as a lawyer, because that's exactly what we are faced with in criminal trials that I deal with on a regular basis. You've got a lot of evidence, and some of that evidence looks like something, and some of that evidence actually is the truth. Your job is to figure out that difference between what merely is and what really is the truth. What really is and what merely seems to be. That's what I'm going to ask you to focus your attention on as you deliberate. Make the distinction between those two things, because throughout these 8 weeks that we presented witnesses and you saw exhibits and all of this evidence was presented, a lot of it, I submit to you, doesn't have anything to do with anything at all in terms of proving that Bob Bashara conspired to kill his wife, that Bob Bashara solicited Joe Gens to kill his wife, that Bob Bashara aided and abetted in the first-degree murder of his wife. Because those 3 counts 1, 2, and 3, are what this trial is all about. This is a murder trial. This isn't an obstruction of justice trial. This isn't a witness intimidation trial. Those are little sideshows, and they're serious charges, and they need to be addressed. I grant you that. But the fact of the matter is, we're here because Jane Bashara died. She died a brutal and horrible death with no justification whatsoever. And I, on behalf of Mr. Bashara and Mrs. Diallo, would never try to say anything different than that. You heard from Dr. Diaz, the medical examiner, who explained in very clear detail, meticulous detail, step by step, the things that happened to Mrs. Bashara that caused her death. Now, in the presentation of the evidence, the people's case in chief throughout the course of this trial, we've seen a number of theories that the defense submits to you are just plain wrong. And the first theory is that Bob hired Tabato to kill Gens because Gens was the only person able to implicate him in Jane's murder. Well, that's wrong. And the reason it's wrong is this. I mean, that's a theory that happened, but the proof is there's 2 reasons, 2 good reasons for Bob Bashara to want to see Joe Gens out of the way. And I'm not justifying or trying to minimize the fact that there was a crime committed by Mr. Bashara when he solicited Tabato, and they enter into this deal where Tabato's going to set up the hit on Joe Gens. Don't misinterpret what we say here as being justification for that, because it isn't. But the fact is, what's important in this trial, and the only reason that evidence has any significance in this trial, is to talk about his motivation for committing that crime. And I submit to you that, first and foremost, he knows, like we all know, that Joe Gens killed Jane Bashara. He wanted revenge. Secondly, Joe Gens very easily could frame Bob Bashara in order to make a good deal for himself. And that's borne out by his own statements. And it's borne out by the facts of this case. Because remember, Joe Gens, he ends up making a deal. He committed a first-degree murder without question. But he ends up pleading guilty to second-degree murder, and he's only serving a sentence of from 17 and a half years to 28 years. Second theory. Bob wanted Jane dead so that he could marry Rachel Gillette and live in that lifestyle happily ever after. This is part of that business of what merely seems to be the lifestyle. This whole BDSM. One of these days I'll get that straight and it'll roll off my tongue more easily. But the fact of the matter is, that is a smokescreen. It's salacious. One of the reasons why this case has had so much publicity, why we have such a following here in this courtroom this afternoon, is because of the sex appeal, the literal sex appeal of this case. All the salacious nature of this oddball lifestyle of bondage, discipline, sadomasochism. The average person doesn't have very much understanding or interest or knowledge about it, but it certainly has been the thing that gave this story life for the last almost 3 years. But the truth of the matter is, Bob had no desire for Jane to die, nor did he have a need for that to even occur. He's not motivated by that. He and Rachel Gillette would continue to live this double life that he had. Miss Lindsay put it so well. He's leading a double life, and there's no question about that. We all know that. But the thing is, he didn't start leading that life in 2011. He'd been doing that, according to Rick Falcinelli, since 2004. He said that he knew Bob for about 10 years. Well, that's 2004. And where did he meet him? He didn't meet him in church. He didn't meet him at a business function. He met him at what they call a social function. It's kind of like a code for dealing with this BDSM, because it was surprising to me how many of these witnesses came in and used the same type of language. But the fact is, he'd known him all that time. So Bob's involved in this, going back from 2004 to the beginning of 2012. And he's known as Rachel Gillette since 2008. And no matter what he did that was wrong, she was outraged about, she broke up with him, she always went back to him. And she would have gone back if they didn't close on that house on Kensington, which they weren't going to do, because that was an impossibility. The third reason, the third theory, is that Bob needed to have Jane dead so that he could close the sale of the house on Kensington. But that wasn't going to be happening. He had no intention of closing that sale or of living with Rachel Gillette. He's going to move into a house right next door to this guy stiff as a board, Michael Carmody, who doesn't know anybody that has an affair, doesn't know a married man that's got a girlfriend. This guy that lives in an ivory tower. Bob's going to move Rachel Gillette and this other person, Miss Oregon, into that house there on Kensington. That's preposterous. The only bright thing that I heard that Mr. Wolf say was what Miss Lindsay quoted earlier today. Bob, you're crazy. Well, that's a nuts idea. But he's telling all that to Rachel because he's humoring her and he's just, filling her head with nonsense. But, sooner or later they were just going to run out of gas with that idea. And that was going to happen because there wasn't going to be any closing. You see, as you all know, because you do have common sense and life experience, one thing, the key thing to buying a house is to show up with the money. Well, we had that guy, the banker, Calcaterra, in here. He wrote this, very non-committal commitment letter, so to speak, from his mortgage company. And this is going back to sometime in October when he testified. But the bottom line is there weren't any, figures there that would show that Bob had the wherewithal in order to be able to close on a house. And he said, hey, look, the only assets they had were Jane's assets. So there was no mortgage. He had no money in place. He hadn't borrowed the money from his mother. She said that she didn't know anything about that, and it was going to be $235,000. So how's he going to do that? The truth of the matter is he isn't going to do that. And what's he going to do later? He's going to have to sweet talk Rachel again, and she'll be mad, and she'll break up. But, when she testified, I quit writing down about the breakups and the reconciliations after I got to the third one, because I thought, this is just ridiculous. And how am I going to get it straight? And I know that you all heard about those things. Maybe your memories are better than me. But like I said, after 3, there were a number more, but I just figured it was irrelevant from that point. And, you know, this idea, Bob did a bad thing. He wasted Kathy Young's time. He wasted Lorraine Rosselli's time, these people, these realtors. They got a good reason to not like him because they put this effort into trying to sell a house, and it's just a lot of foolishness, and they end up with no closing. No closing, no payday. So they have a legitimate beef. But it's not a reason to be killing Jane Bashara. And nothing would happen differently. Had he decided that this is the way we're going to pay for the house. I'm going to kill Jane on Tuesday, and then I'll show up with a big sack of money on Friday. That's an impossibility. That just didn't happen. Didn't make any more money available. And, you know, this whole focus on the 401k plan, Robert Jr. testified back in October about the fact that that money is still tied up to this day, or at least to that day, October the 23rd or thereabouts, during the course of this trial. So obviously that wouldn't have closed. So this just wasn't going to happen. And this talk that Kathy Young heard and James Krausman heard about what they were going to do with the house, that's just Bob giving Rachel a lot of baloney. And that's all it is. The next theory that I submit the people have postulated, and it's still incorrect, is that Bob needed to have Jane dead so that he'd get to her 401k account valued at $800,000. This loses track and sight of the fact that Jane Bashara was a breadwinner in that family. Now, she may have protected that $800,000 account or whatever its value was at various points in time, but the fact of the matter is, she's the one who's the strong earner. We saw those, income statements side by side. In 2011, Bob earned $18,000 and some odd dollars, less than 20 grand. He's making less than, I would say, 20. Maybe he's making 22% of what it is that Jane's made. The thing is, that $94,000 that shows up on her W-2, which is an exhibit that's been admitted into evidence for 2011, doesn't include the amount of money that she was getting from her pension from DTE. Now, she's the one who's paying for the nice lifestyle over there in Grosse Pointe Park. It's on her income, because $20,000, you can't live there on $20,000. She's the one, don't forget, she's up out the door at 5:45 in the morning. She's the one that's not getting home until 6 or 6:30 at night. She's working hard all the time. Those are her values. She's a hard worker. What did Bob tell the detectives on the day that he goes in for the interview on the 26th of January? He was still in bed when Jane went to work. He didn't even get up until about 8 o'clock in the morning. Well, if you don't get up and out of bed in the morning and hit it hard all day long, you're not going to earn much of a living, especially here in southeastern Michigan, and certainly not after the recession we had. So he's got it good. And she's the person who's given it to him. That good life, providing for him to live in that nice house, to have the leisure time, to be able to go out and do all those good deeds in a Rotary, to raise money for St. Michael's Episcopal Church, to help support Grosse Pointe South High School, to go on a 2-week trip with his daughter's volleyball team when they're at a camp somewhere. At one point during her high school career, when Eileen Stradilek and he did that together. You can't do all those things where you're just basically goofing off unless you've got some stream of income. So why would he ever kill Jane? I put down there she's the golden goose. That might sound a little bit crass, but the fact of the matter is, the hard figures make it clear that she was the breadwinner. Why would he want her dead? And then the fifth prosecution theory about divorce. We heard about that. Well, if Bob's going to get a divorce, the person who loses in a divorce is Jane, not Bob. Now we have this Patrick Webb. Remember him, the guy who fashioned himself as some kind of an expert on his BDSM stuff. Well, he says, he doesn't have this recorded, he claims, his word, that Bob said, well, it'd be cheaper if I just killed the bitch. Okay? Well, that sounds damaging when you consider a piece of evidence like that, you got to do two things. You got to, number one, size up the individual who said it. And you got to make a decision about whether you believe him. The second thing you have to do is you got to consider it in the context. If it actually was said by Bob Bashara, you got to think about the context in which it was said. He's leading a double life. He's there with Rachel. They're at this BDSM hotel or whatever kind of place that this guy Webb was running, in the fraternity house or the reformatory, depending on when in time his statement was made. All those people around know that Bob and Rachel are together. They also know that Bob is divorced. He's got to say these things in Rachel's presence, and I'm going to get a divorce because that keeps her happy. And so then he's just joking around with these other people, and he's saying, oh yeah, sure, I'm going to get a divorce. Maybe I ought to do it like this. He's not serious. This isn't a piece of evidence upon which you got to find beyond a reasonable doubt that this man over here, Bashara, wanted to kill his wife and then is out announcing it to the world, to clowns like Patrick Webb. That's where your common sense comes in. That's where reason comes in. You think about these things and you go, oh, wait a minute. The guy's leading a double life, and it's all BS when he's with Rachel and the BDSM people. It's baloney. Then he's over in the straight life, Grosse Pointe Park, the Rotary, the St. Michael's Church. Well, he's not saying anything like that then. And he and Jane, from all experiences, are a happy couple. And they have a nice life. And he's doing good things. He's the president of the Rotary, and he's raising money for the community. He's active in the church. He's raising money for the church. So he's got these two things going on at the same time. You got to ask yourself, and you got to decide. Well, is Rachel Gillette going to force him to do all these things? Because don't forget, the person who loses in a divorce, according to Jane's sister, Jane's own state of mind, her belief when she discussed this with her sister, Miss Rowe, was that she'd get half. She'd have half of her pension. She'd have half of her 401k. She wouldn't be living in that house on Middlesex. She'd be 50 or in her mid-50s, and she'd be living in a condo. She didn't want any part of it. She recognized the reality that she would lose in a divorce, not Bob. We know this man here, he killed him. He's responsible without question. You got to ask yourself this question now. Why is it that this man, this brute, this individual who killed Jane Bashara with his boot by crushing her neck, breaking her windpipe, not one time but two times, fractures going in crisscross directions, causing her to die an excruciating death. And not only did she suffer those injuries, but you saw that hematoma that she suffered to her head, that blunt force trauma, either by being kicked by those boots or by having him raise that boot up again and crush it down on her throat repeatedly, causing the right side of her head to be bashed against the ground. This man is second-degree murder. This man over here, on the proof you've seen so far, he's the target. They want him. They want him bad. They want him for first-degree murder, solicitation to murder, conspiracy to murder. Why? He lied when he voluntarily goes to the police department on the 26th of January, and you saw the tape. He doesn't tell them everything about his BDSM lifestyle. He doesn't tell Special Agent O'Riordan about the affair he's having with Rachel Gillette. Now, is that consciousness of guilt? Or is that, I look pretty bad as it is here. Or is that because he's embarrassed by that? He's leading this double life. It's being exposed to the light of day, or it will be. He's fearful of that. He knows he didn't commit this crime, but he's got some skeletons in his closet without question. And he didn't come forth with the information. He didn't just throw himself on the sword in front of those police officers and say, oh yeah, by the way, I've been having this affair. He's trying to sort out, now I got this huge problem that I didn't create. I look bad, and I'm going to look worse. Because remember what he told the detectives when he first went down to the police station the day after his wife's body was found. He says, I understand that in 70% of the cases, the people look at the husband, or the police look at the husband. So he's got that in his mind going in. I doubt like heck that he thought that by putting out there the fact that he was having an affair, that would help him at all, okay? And is he thinking clearly? You know, we're holding Bob to a real high standard here about how it is that he's supposed to conduct himself when he interacts with the police. The problem with all that is his wife was murdered. Unexpectedly, brutally. He's got to deal with the grief of all that. And, you know, there's no rule book about reaction and how it is that you deal with somebody dying. There's a wide gamut of a wide array of manners in which different people respond to horrible news. Now, there's a rush to judgment in this case. I submit to you that Detective Olson or Investigator Olson from Detroit, he says, I'm going to take the lead on it. Because Captain Locke over here, he's not experienced in homicides. He never had anybody get killed in Grosse Pointe Park before. So I'm the Detroit guy. I'm the guy from homicide. I know what I'm doing. I'll do the thinking. And so what are they doing? First thing they do is they have a little confab out in front of Bob's house. Now he is keenly interested in knowing what's going on. And you know that because Captain Locke told you that he called the night of the 24th, and you know about that. You even heard the dispatcher talk about that. And then he called throughout the night or the early morning of the 25th of January. He wants to know what's going on. And I recounted all those different times that he called the police station. They're not calling him. They don't have to look for him. He's right there, which gives a lie to this business, this idea that when Officer Matthews comes back to the Bashara home to have Mr. Bashara sign a consent form so they can put her, Mrs. Bashara's vehicle identification into the lien, that he is coming from down or upstairs to downstairs and he's rubbing sleep out of his eyes. Well, that's awful funny at 5 o'clock in the morning, because if you look at the record, you see that Bob calls at 4:49. He calls again at 4:57 to where? The police station. So how much sleep was he getting when he was calling in the moments before 2 o'clock in the morning? He called again at 3:28. Where is he sound asleep that night? That's just not right. But why does Officer Matthews say that? Because there's a rush to judgment. And we want to make Bashara look bad and impress upon you that this guy who purportedly had his wife killed, purportedly was present when it happened, he doesn't care. Well, that's not true. Because the fact of the matter is, we got more phone records in this case than I've ever seen accumulated for any other reason in my lifetime. But we got phone records, and Bob is a guy who gets on the phone a lot. There's no question about that. But we got phone records that show that throughout that night, he's trying to find out what's going on. And he's asking what is happening, and he's making those calls to make inquiry because he cares. So by the time 10:30 in the morning or thereabouts rolls around, and Detective Olson, Sergeant Hannes, and Captain Locke appear, and they're talking out on the sidewalk before they come up to the front door. You got to ask yourself, well, what is the discussion? Now, if all they have to do is go in there and tell Mr. Bashara that, hey, I am really sorry, I've got horrible news to tell you. You know, I could do that. I could come around the corner on 2 wheels and pull up his driveway and race up to his front door and do that without giving it any thought at all. So what's the confab for? Well, I'll tell you what the confab's for. It's because on the morning of the 25th of January, at that scene on Anna, where her body was discovered, Mrs. Bashara's, they made up their mind then. There's something funny about all this. We're going to deal with the husband. I'll bet you he's in. That target was on his back before he knew it, because it didn't get announced until 2 days later. It's always been a rush to judgment. And that's the thing that has been consistent throughout this. Bob's the guy. It doesn't matter who else might pop up who else involved in this case may have committed a crime, we're going to give those people a free pass because this is our target. This is a big prize. We want this guy, Bob Bashara. So can I get the next one? Or is it working? Yeah. Thank you.
Wait a minute, let's stand up and take a stretch.
Oh. Okay. Now, I've already talked a little bit about Investigator Olson. But you know, he's the guy who says inside the house when Bob and Captain Locke and Sergeant Hannes are all sitting together with Investigator Olson, Bob's got no reaction to the news that Jane is dead. Well, that makes him sound like he's a pretty cold-hearted guy. But you got to really scrutinize that. Because what does Captain Locke say? Well, he says, you know, I knew him from before. He was pretty quiet. And I asked him, I said, is that customary? He goes, no, pretty talkative. Bob in shock? You got to ask yourself that question. Then, Mrs. Bashara, Nancy Bashara, the defendant's mother, she says she heard him scream out. She was in a different room, and she ran to him. Now, you can say to yourself, well, gee whiz, that's the guy's mother. She's going to stand up for her boy. Don't forget, Nancy Bashara tells you when Miss Lindsay asked her whether she knew him, she says, yes, since December the 12th, 1957, at some hour of the day when he was born, whenever that was. And she knew it by heart. So, yeah, you could count on somebody's ma standing up and saying something for you that would be beneficial. But then we got a fourth person to comment on this, and that is Debbie Breen. She is a friend of Jane's. She comes over to the house. She sees Bob with his head in his hands, and he's crying. She doesn't like Bob. She's not his advocate. She wasn't a witness who showed up because she wanted to put a good word in for him, but she came telling the truth. And the truth of the matter is that he did have emotion about the loss of his wife. He was torn up about it. Now there's this other business. This stuff about when did the cat get out of the bag about this being a murder? Because, you know, Olson, he's playing it smart. He wants to trap Bob. He says, we didn't tell him anything like that. We didn't make any announcement. We just told him that his wife's body was found in her car over on the east side, or up on the east side. Well, I would submit to you that, you know, Bob, he's not a stupid person. He knows that there's something wrong because his wife didn't come home and she didn't leave a note and he doesn't know why she isn't there. 3 plainclothes policemen come to his house. They're pretty grim. They got this news to tell him. This is completely unlike Jane. She's perfectly healthy. She didn't have a heart attack. She didn't have a stroke and die in her car. And she wouldn't have been up on the east side. So, because he isn't stupid, because he's using his common sense, he knows damn well what's going on here. So if he says that to his daughter, and Ms. Flaska says, well, you know, no one ever mentioned the word murder before, but he tells that to Jessica, is that something that's odd? You think that because the implication is he's using insider knowledge that he has and the police didn't give it to him. Well, he just put 2 and 2 together and got 4. It's not because he's guilty. It's because he's engaged, he cares, and he's come to the conclusion that we all know to be the truth. Now, we got Captain Locke. He's there too. Captain Locke's got some other significance. This is really significant because there's no evidence presented throughout the entire course of this trial that the death of Jane Bashara occurred in the garage of that house. You just don't have that. And Captain Locke, he provided the information a little bit late, but nevertheless, that report that's in evidence from Michigan State University's botany and science departments that the leafy material found on Jane's sock is not at all matched to the leafy material and vegetation material found on the garage floor. Now, if that report had been around in the hands of the prosecutor's office on the 11th of November, you never would have had all that evidence from Melinda Jackson about the little drop of blood found on the garage floor with luminol and that leafy material or vegetation being maybe 6 feet apart from one another or 5 foot 6 apart, whatever it was. None of that has any relevance. That's the reason that all of that evidence was presented to you was to convince you that the crime occurred in the garage. There's no evidence to prove that it's in the garage. And this thing about it being a stage scene, when you look at those photographs from Anot Street there in the alley, and you show the car, the car door open on the right side, and on the floorboard is the purse. The purse is dumped over. What's sitting up on the top? What's sitting up on the top is a wallet that doesn't have any cash in it. So who says that Joe Getz didn't take something from Mrs. Bashara? And who says where this happened? And you know what? This other business about all those marks along the left-hand side of that vehicle, where's the coat? Where's the evidence from the coat that shows that all that occurred because Jane, all those marks are there because Jane got rubbed up against that car on the left side during some sort of a struggle? We don't know that. There's no evidence to show that. People want you to infer that. They want you to make those quantum leaps because that's the difference between what really is and what merely seems to be. And that is why you're here, to make that distinction between those two things. Don't be fooled, and don't let the BDSM lifestyle fill in any blanks for you. Scrutinize the evidence. Hold the people to their burden. It's beyond a reasonable doubt. And there is reasonable doubt in this trial. Then we have Michael Narduzzi, Detective Narduzzi. He, on this timeline, we got Bob named as a person of interest on the 27th. That's a Friday of January in the evening. The following day, he receives a phone call at 9:46 in the morning, and he contacts his lawyer, which he didn't have a lawyer until the night of the 27th. But Mr. Brewstar came here, he testified about writing that letter, and in doing so, Bob related to him about this phone call that he'd received on the 28th of January, in which Gentz is ranting and saying that you owe me some money, I did you a favor, I want $1,500. Mr. Brewstar takes that over to the Grosse Pointe Police Department the next morning, the 29th, and he delivers it. It's written out to Captain Hiller of the police department, and he says what Mr. Bashara told him. Now, some things were mentioned about that letter not having anything in it about all the other calls that had gone on between Gentz and Bashara earlier in the week. Well, why would any of that be in there if when the threat came, it was on the 28th? And that is the question that, you have to ask. The fact of the matter is, Bob Bashara identifies Gentz after he gets this call, tells it to his lawyer, they don't waste time, they go right to the police station, or Mr. Brewstar does, the following morning or day, he delivers it on the 29th, and Detective Narduzzi goes over to Joe Gentz's house, and he knows how to find it because it's right in the letter that Bob Bashara wrote, or his lawyer did, over there on Weyburn, and they talked to Joe Gentz. Officer Taylor, guy we didn't see, but he went with Detective Narduzzi. They take him back to the police station. Now, they don't record anything that is said, so we don't have a record of that, and then they let him go. But Gentz, he figures that he's cooked because inside of 12 hours, he's back at the police station with Vergona and his pastor, Fritsch, and he's turning himself in, but not before he threw out his boots. Joe Gentz isn't that dumb. He can think for himself. And he thought that for himself. And then, on the 5th of March, Detective Narduzzi, he's got notice of a person by the name of JJ, who's a friend of Joe Gens, and he goes to see him. And Captain Locke is there too. But they say that this guy, JJ, John McKee, he wasn't cooperative. And because he wasn't cooperative, they didn't talk to him anymore. But they find out, they know, the reason they go see him to begin with is because on the night of the 24th of January, the night that Jane was abducted and killed, those two were seen in a place called My Dad's Bar together. They let him go. We don't have JJ. It's not here. And then we have Sergeant Marco Reardon, not Sergeant, Special Agent Marco Reardon from the United States Secret Service. 27th of January, he talks to Bob Bashara. He says, well, his affect was a little odd. He'd just gone and identified the body of his wife, and he just didn't seem like the same kind of guy, or it didn't seem like he was affected the way that I thought it should be. Once again, where's the rule book that says exactly how you're supposed to react when something bad happens? And by this time, it isn't like, Bob just happened to be walking around a street corner and saw his wife dead when he turned the corner. This is something that he's known about for 3 days or 2 days, and he has to go over and identify her by her face because they have it all shrouded around her. And you saw all that evidence of how bodies are shown for purposes of having relatives identify them. Not too much other than just the face. So, and then Bob is there, once again, voluntarily, trying to help the police. And at the same time, unbeknownst to him, he's the target. They're trying to take everything that he says and use it against him. And he's asked about whether he's having an affair, and he says no, but he kind of backs off of that just a little bit. He said, well, I did have an affair about 8 years ago. Is that truthful? No, it's not. Well, what's he lying about? Is he lying about, I didn't kill my wife? No. I mean, that's the reason why we're here. Not about whether he's lecherous or he's having an affair or any of those kinds of things. Because he's not charged with adultery, even though that is a crime. It's not something that's before you in this trial. This is a murder trial. We got some evidence here regarding the telephone usage of not telephones, but cell phones. Exhibit number 294. You're going to have all these exhibits in the jury room when you're deliberating. This is Special Agent Christopher Hess of the FBI. He's an expert. He was qualified in cellular tower analysis, and he wrote a report. It is that exhibit 294, and on page 6 of that report he goes, however, the cell sites utilized provided service in and around both locations of interest. Those locations of interest are 552 Middlesex and the location of the Mac property that the defendant owned, Hard Luck Cafe or Lounge, and Dylan's Raw Bar. The second sentence that he says on page 6, the antennas transmit the same frequency, therefore, no determination can be made to differentiate which cellular footprint the target telephone utilized. So I submit to you that that call made by Bashara at 6:26 p.m. came from behind the Hard Luck Lounge and not from over there on Middlesex by the house. And then Special Agent Hess shows all these different towers in this map that is, the area that shows 552 Middlesex, and this is in this exhibit right behind that page number 6, and shows these different cell towers, and then he shows a picture on the next page of the Hard Luck, or not, actually that's Dylan's, but this is behind the Hard Luck Lounge property, and he says Tower 94, 144, 156, and 994 signals noted behind Hard Luck Lounge. So we know that Bob was back there behind that place because he said so, and other people saw him there. And those are those towers that he's talking about, 994, 156, 94. So, and 156. So the fact is, that fits right in with what it is that Bob has been saying all along. I was at my Mac property. And who saw him there? Christy Sample, the bartender. She said he showed up about 5:15, and he didn't leave until 8:15 after he and Mike Carmody had a couple beers together. He was in and out, and he was around the premises. Missy Keller, she saw him out there cleaning up when she looked out. Carol Porzondek, she saw Bob on the sidewalk in front of the place at about 7 o'clock, which is exactly corroborated by what Mike Carmody said when he showed up there to have 2 beers with him. Think about this Carmody, he says, oh, I feel like I've been used by Bob Bashara, used me as an alibi, he set me up because I'm a solid citizen and all that. This was a good way to have people see me with him at that time, and that makes me being used. Well, I got a question for Mike Carmody. A question for you to think about. What would Bob do if Mike Carmody had said, you know what, it's a cold night in January, it's dark, I'm home, I don't feel like putting on different clothes and coming out, I'm just going to stay home, thanks anyway. He had no way of knowing at about 6:40 or thereabouts whether Mike Carmody would come out to play that evening. He had no way of knowing the answer to that at all. Why does he want to see him? Not to be an alibi, but because he wants to have a couple of beers with his friend. That's what he said. And this Carol Porzondek, how does he know that she's going to be anywhere near there? But she confirms it. And Missy Keller, same thing. And then, they make a lot about Missy Keller. Bob goes to see Missy after he's named as a person of interest. A couple months go by, or at least in March, he's talking to her and he says, you saw me there. And he sees her friend and he says, and you saw me there too that night. Well, is there anything that's not logical about that? Here's a guy that knows that he's in the crosshairs of the prosecution. He hasn't been arrested yet. He hasn't been charged yet. But he certainly knows that he's the person of interest. He's the suspect. And he wants to make certain that nothing, that anything that he can do to bring witnesses that would help him out is done. It's his tax return. There's an exhibit. It's 518. It's entered by stipulation last week. It shows that on Bob's computer at his house, he logged into the QuickBooks program on the computer. Now, why did he do that? Because what he told the police, what he said from the beginning is Jane and I were supposed to get together about 8 o'clock. We were going to work on taxes together. This isn't doing a, 1040 and like you would go to H&R Block and have them do for you if all you have is your wage certificate, the W-2. There's a little bit more complication to that. And Rick Falsinelli confirmed that fact, being a property owner, renting out houses or apartments himself. And so you got to get your records in order before you can ever show it to your accountant or your tax preparer, and that's what they were going to do. And his computer corroborates that. So look at that, because you'll see that his statement regarding those plans is a truthful statement, not just something made up. Then we've got this scientific evidence. Melinda Jackson testified about one blood spot being on the garage floor, and she collected blood off the garage door, and she said that she wasn't surprised if somebody who lived in the house might have a little bit of their own blood laying around there. And then we got Andrea Young. She's the DNA person. And what did she say? She conducted DNA analysis. The blood on the floor, that little spot that they got, that through the luminol applied by the state police, that showed that it was Jane's blood. And then there's YSTR DNA material in the floor that matches to Bob. Now the YSTR is different than DNA that has anything to do with your chromosomes other than your Y chromosome, and it shows that blood, that YSTR DNA runs down the male line, and that Bob has exactly the same. It'd be a match to his brother, or not, well, probably to his brother, but to his, if he had one, but to his father and to his son. So these are people that live in the house. His dad's been dead a long time, but his son certainly is well acquainted with that house and has been there. And so that could have not even been Bob's. It could have been Robert Jr.'s. And even if it is Bob's, who cares? It's not significant. It's not like he's got his DNA dropped in some crime scene that isn't his house and he has no business being at. This is where he lives and where Jane lives. And both Miss Jackson and Ms. Young testified that they can't tell you how old those blood samples are. She can't tell you how old that blood on the garage door is. but the garage door matched to Jane. You know that the DNA on Gentz's right boot bottom, Jane cannot be excluded. It's not a perfect match, but there are some of those alleles that are the same. And so why would anything that even that Jane can't be excluded be on the bottom of Joe Gentz's boot heel? Well, we know why, because he did this. He committed the crime, and that's how he did it. And that's how he left those impressions on her face, those pattern impressions that showed up on her face and on her neck. And then he's got his DNA on the gear shifter. He can't be excluded. But then there is a match to the gear shifter with his YSTR. You know, it isn't Joe Gentz's dad driving that Mercedes-Benz, and it certainly isn't his son, because he doesn't have one. So that's definitely his. And that's different than the situation with Bob. And then we've got the YSTR DNA in Jane's left hand nails matched to Gentz. Where do you get that big cut on his left cheek? Because she's fighting for her life while he killed her. Gentz can't be excluded from the blood found in Jane's left hand nail. Clearly it shows Mr. Second Degree Murder Man killed Jane Bashara.
Let's stop here, 10-minute recess.
All
All
rise.
rise for the jury.
You may be seated. Yeah.
Do you understand?
Sydney, you think if I just move that table? This way? Once I get it back online. Yeah, I'll show you what it looks like. So, this out here.
Right, that's from his board.
I can show them that. It shows what time of day it is.
here, indicator. Yeah, you know, I'm gonna go up there. Matter of fact, I got a 10 cases. I'm pulling around it right now. Very about her. Very about her business. I like it. Very about her business. Not long. Here we go. Okay.
And 156. Yeah, but you can read it right. You'll be able to read it right off the exhibit. Because it'll be right there, and I'll zoom in where you need to be. What do you mean the fields? The coverage area.
Yeah, about 4 more minutes.
I guess I could. Would you? Do you know the exhibit number for that? What's that exhibit? That's 6.
Oh, absolutely.
What? Super. What's up? 6.1911. Yeah. Okay. Yep. Mark, what were you saying? What slide?
What's the number?
Yeah, I have anything that was in your code. So tell him that. Because he just has to tell me the code. Right. Okay.
Okay, so you incorporated this. Okay.
Her statement. Oh, yeah.
We don't have these.
Yeah, we don't have it in PowerPoint format.
So we'll have to replace 6.
I fixed it.
It's locked up now, we can't use it, but that's okay.
Oh, I didn't touch the laptop.
No, something happened with the program is rebooted. Look, that's why I like technology. You see me? Technology, something special. Oh, I'm a pen and paper type of gal myself.
11.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, that would be. Well, we'll be fine.
Is it saying no signal? 2 of 8. Good job, Pat.
One of eight.
In our break, we have technical difficulties.
What?
Yeah,
Well, we just continue tomorrow. Okay, I'll see everybody tomorrow. No, take your time.
Well, no, it's
you. What the heck?
Look, go ahead as best you can.
we'll get to 3.
They don't mind doing rebuttal tomorrow, do you?
Not all, just whatever you want us to do, we'll do.
So we want this to be right.
Well, it's right either way. I mean, you know, like, I can live without your PowerPoint and say, remember, right?
Go ahead and fix it.
That's what he's doing.
It's working on, I mean, the thing is
It don't matter.
Just force it to shut off and turn it back on.
Use the people's computer. Just take their stuff off.
Just give me your password and your flash drive. I'll take care of everything.
Oh,
Sure you would, Pat.
Like the iPad too.
The iPad, yeah.
we're to 3. At least we're
That's
making,
good.
we don't know that it's going to work.
What? Oh, yeah, no, I will try to do it the way you did it. 379. Why is 379? Where is that? In what?
In the phones, documents, through ATM. That's Morgan.
that does have its stress.
Okay, that's what
I'm missing something. I might not have that exhibit. That's why it came up red, right?
What is it that was now? 2?
Yeah, I'll take it. Plug it in the here.
Well, he said turn it off.
Nothing worse than
You
having,
can't, even if you turn it off, it's still going back to the same.
we just don't know at the end of it.
No, what we're gonna do is you're gonna force it to shut off, then we're gonna turn it back on and see what happens. And then shut off the updates. It's just going through an update cycle.
Well, do that.
It's not gonna break the
Said be back.
computer.
Can we get one of the media people from the print media to volunteer their laptop?
You wanna put your PowerPoint on my laptop, you can put it on my laptop and run it off my laptop.
And that way you don't have to.
You just have to put it on a flash drive. It doesn't have any video or audio. Right? It just has
Yeah,
text.
just, yeah.
All you need to do is put it on a flash drive and I'll run it off my computer.
Really, it won't have is pictures. That's no.
It will have the pictures.
Okay.
The pictures will be
Just won't be
embedded.
video.
Video and audio don't get embedded with
Excuse
PowerPoint.
me. You got a flash drive?
And just put it on there, we'll run it off this computer for you. Mars, can you plug in your computer and run it to them in case I continue to work on this? Okay? So,
You're 10 minutes shy of an hour.
We're on the same wave.
hey Rob,
Which Rob? Where,
why don't you
what
see
you want?
Rob?
What do you want me to do? I'll help you.
Oh, okay, just give him, yeah, he's gonna give him his computer.
Who?
We're gonna set it up over there.
Oh, Mark's computer?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
What's the TIF mark? I'm sorry.
That's special. They would have kept going probably. They wouldn't have done that. You ain't gonna see how that happened? That's okay.
That's fine.
He fixed it without you. He did good.
I couldn't fix this, I just screwed up.
Yes.
possible. Oh, it's at 5 now. Ooh. 5 of 8. Ooh. See, my computer do like me. I tell it it never needs to update. I will delay an update. What, might go? Right here. Oh, it's got it. Well, tell we ready.
This all counts against your time.
Pat.
Clock's on.
Look here, Pat. We're going to have a conversation. Because I know you like me secretly. And I got that big, look, I got that big 8x10 too. For your office. For Pat. You never.
Don't bother me. Email.
I shan't. I shalln't. Huh? Girl. Gotta do that too. Gotta get the polls right too. We don't need, listen, after you get, I don't need a break. We just need to go right into it.
Well, right, yeah.
I ain't got time for a break. Hey, Lillian, hey. Go. I don't need all this time. We're on to tell the judge.
Cynthia, no? Yeah.
You go back here if you want to. I ain't going back here. Yep, tell her come on. Yes, she's coming? Okay. Hey, get him. Lillian? Okay.
There you go.
Lillian, books are, huh? Oh, okay.
So, Mark, when I play that, what do I play it with? When I show that image, I play it with 6/19/11.
I would think.
6/19/11. That's including the 9.
Did you come up with this? Are you right here?
Well. I don't have much to do. You messing with me. All right.
Good to go. Just call it one game.
What's it on?
Yeah, but I don't know if I can do it side by side or I don't know the issue. I might have to do one after the other.
That's all right.
We're good. Yeah, we're good.
I'm good. We're good.
All right, Judge.
Turn it off. What's off? Is it on there? Hit something. Hey, Mark. Is it on? The computer's on. Oh, over here, something. Somebody kicked something.
Please be seated.
We had a little technical
back.
difficulty.
Thanks, Mark.
Work with these computers. Ready to go.
Hey.
Mr. McCarthy.
Thank you, Your Honor. I want to talk now about the on-indictment. I said that there was a rush of judgment in this case, that Bob was the person who was picked out. He was the target right from the beginning, and that the people will pay any price in order to be able to assure that this man here is convicted of the crimes with which he's been charged. First on that list is Paul Monroe. Paul Monroe has not been charged with, number one, delivering cocaine. He said, at preliminary examination, that he gave Bob some cocaine out of the goodness of his heart, a substantial amount of it. Then during the trial, he admitted that he lied when he did that, and we said that at the preliminary examination, but actually he had sold cocaine to Bob. Now either one of those things is delivery of a controlled substance, but he hasn't been charged with any crime for that. Furthermore, you can't have it both ways. You can't be telling the truth under oath at the preliminary examination and say something opposite at the trial. He's not charged with perjury. Third, the reason he's here is to say that Bob confessed to him. So, in order to get him up there on that witness stand, they had to not only not charge him with the perjury, the drug dealing, but also with putting in the false tips. He's the one who drops a dime on April Montgomery and Charles Wilson. Why does he do that? He says it's because Bob told him to do it. Well, the only thing that those phone records from that area, 6 Mile and Woodward, prove is that Bob was over there in that area getting some cocaine from Paul Monroe. That probably is true, because we know from Jim Wilson's testimony that Bob did dabble in cocaine. By the time he's getting some cocaine from Paul Monroe, he probably is under a tremendous amount of stress. By the time you get out to June of 2012, Mrs. Bashara's been dead for 4 or 5 months. The investigation is ongoing. He is the target, and I'm certain that would create a tremendous amount of stress in your life. And if you use a controlled substance to try and relieve that stress, maybe that's exactly what he was doing. But that doesn't mean that he was over there confessing to Paul Monroe, or that he was asking Paul Monroe to make up these stories about April Montgomery and Charles Wilson. Monroe had his own reasons for doing that. That was his old girlfriend, April. She jilted him for Charles Wilson. So he's got that reason alone to be sore at the two of them. And then when he testified, he says, well, matter of fact, Charles Wilson armed robbed me one time. Well, what better way to get even with a guy that robbed you than to have the cops sick on you for something that you didn't do? The next person, Robert Fick, testified during the trial unequivocally, without immunity, that he perjured himself when he testified under oath at the investigative subpoena on May 9, 2012. Never been charged. Darrell Bradford, he's the guy that you didn't see, but by stipulation, we know that Mr. Bradford also gave a false tip to the police, identifying April Montgomery as a person who had a reason to be killing Jane Bashara, and he did that at the behest of Paul Monroe, who had his own reasons for sicking the police on Miss Montgomery and Charles Wilson. He's never been charged. And we got Therese Giffen, Nancy Bashara, and Stephanie Samuel all receiving immunity. And it's one thing that I think that's not correct. Stephanie Samuel had no knowledge that she, to be tampering with this gun. I don't believe that she really hid that. The thing is she's got these bullets that end up in her house over in Windsor. And that's not until she takes some things out of Bob's house, out of his file drawer, and moves them over to Windsor, she says. And this is after Bob's been arrested, and after the Detroit Police Department conduct a thorough search in his home on the 27th day of January and never find those bullets. And the Michigan State Police come 2 weeks later on the 8th of February in 2012, and they never find them either. Yet they search the place from top to bottom. And among the things that they find is the will and the trust of Jane. So they're into the drawers, they're into all the private places, they're looking all over the place, but they didn't find those bullets. So how do we know that those ever belong to Bob? And then we've got Larry Ellington, brother Steve Vergona, who never showed up with all those notes that he says he took about the things that Joe Gentz told him, even though he was ordered to do so. He got a free pass. And then we got Larry Ellington. Now, Larry Ellington says that Bob ordered not 1, but 4 hits on people when he was a prisoner over at the Oaks Correctional Facility in Manistee. They're together for 1 week, from the 15th of May to the 21st of May, before Larry Ellington writes a letter to Kim Worthy and says, hey, you would be very interested to hear what it is that Bob Bashara is telling me. And then he writes a letter to his lawyer. He says, Bob Bashara has asked me to have hits done on 2 people on the same day. And then, a couple weeks later, 6th of June, Detective Matuk goes out to the Oaks to talk to Larry Ellington, and what does he say? He says, there's 3 people. Now it's Joe Gentz, Steve Tabato, and this Thomas Ramsey. And by the time Ms. Lindsay goes out there to do the investigative subpoena, the story grows even greater, and he says now they want you, or Bob wants you too. So there's 4 people. And of course, Bob hasn't been charged with a crime as a result of Larry Ellington saying those things. And why would that be? Because another thing about character development I learned in studying English is we learn about character 3 ways. 1 is what a character says. 2 is what a character does. And 3 is what other people say about it. And when a prosecutor's office doesn't bring any charges against Bob on Larry Ellington's word, that tells you that Larry Ellington is a useful idiot. In this case, come in, testify against him to say that Bob did those things. But no one's going to bring a prosecution solely on the word of Larry Ellington. Don't forget, he's the guy who's the fiction writer. Rise to Power, his book, made it up out of his mind, his whole imagination. He's an opportunist. This was a way that he could work a deal for himself by saying that Bob did some bad things and ordered these hits, and then get some consideration when he goes back for resentencing. So you ask yourself about the $50. Well, I submit to you that Mr. Bashara, who's from Grosse Pointe, a white man who's never been to prison before, finds himself in the unfortunate circumstance of being on level 4 of the Oaks Correctional Facility, a dangerous place. Larry Ellington is sitting there in a cell with him, probably explaining the circumstances of his current position and location, telling him that he's connected with the Moors, some sort of gang network connected from one prison to another. Larry, well, he wasn't rotating then, I guess, whatever that means, but nevertheless, he's connected. And if he can provide protection to Bob, Bob's going to need it. This is a dangerous place. So when you see that clip of Bob and Larry walking around the yard together, that's because Larry's right there. He's his protection. He's looking out for him. The word goes out to all those Moors and any other bad guys that might be hurting Bob in there. Larry is looking out for me. But protection has a price. High cost of living in prison. So Rick Falcinelli reluctantly puts $50 into his account, Larry Ellington's account, because Bob said so. Well, why does Bob want to have Larry get $50? For a hit? No, so that he's not hit. Why does Bob write out that thing about the house on Guilford Street and show him that there's some income that can be derived from this? Because that's going to be a benefit to Larry Ellington, to protect him. The difference between what he sees and what merely seems to be. Those are the things to think of. Now with Joe Gentz, you got Mary Moore, say number 22, is it? You got Rebecca Thornton, the landlord. She makes all this big deal about Bob saying that he's known Joe all this time. Bob is her agent. She hired him, but she never paid him. She stiffed him on putting Joe in that house. Of course he showed up with the lease. Of course he's got a receipt. Of course he's got that other document, the application. That's his job. That's what she hired him to do. She wants to disavow all that stuff and make him look like he's somehow or another guilty. That wasn't his $10 $100 bills that she received that day. Those were Joe's. He's handing them to her because he's acting as the agent. And the receipt is signed by Bob Bashara and Mrs. Fortin. So it's not like it's Bob's money doing the getting into this place. It is Joe's money, and he's acting as Miss Fortin's agent. And then we've got Mary Moore. She's the person that's with Joe the day after the death of Mrs. Bashara. This is on, she works at the St. Vincent de Paul. She's giving him a ride over to the phone store. He's supposedly got a lot of money on him. He buys a new phone, and he tells her, during her testimony, she said that Bob told her that he was going to buy a car. Going to buy one. Not I'm getting one. Why's Joe got to buy a car if he's getting a Cadillac from Bob and $8,000 or whatever story Joe told about how much he was being paid for killing Jane Bashara? Why would he tell Mary Morey that he's going to go out and buy a car? And she also said that he likes going to casinos. So we don't know where that money came from. And we also know that Jane didn't have any money in her purse or her wallet. Laura Calloway. She says that Bob drops off that check. Take a good look at that check. The check says Joe. Doesn't even say Joe Gentz. But it's not for anyone other than Joe Gentz, but it's made out to him for $452. Bob takes that in there into that store himself to leave it for Joe. He identified himself to Laura Calloway, so he's not hiding his connection, and maybe it's an odd thing that he would do that the day after he finds out that his wife is dead, but he's sure not secreting who he is. He is out there openly and notoriously saying, hey, listen, when this guy against comes here, give him this check. I'm Bob Bashara. And then we've already talked about Mr. Brewster. Now, next phase of the closing argument is going to be presented by my colleague and partner in this case, Lillian Diallo. And so, Ms. Diallo, it's your show.
Thank you.
Can attorneys approach?
All right, ladies and gentlemen of this jury, I have spent 1/5 almost of a year with you guys, and thank you and good afternoon. Now, before we get started with my portion of this closing, I'm going to tell you and look you in the face when I tell you, I told you there were 3 things in this case. Excuse me. Oh, I know.
Come on,
Okay. I told you in the beginning, and I looked you in your face, and I told you there were 3 things that were absolutely not going to be true. And I told you that. And I told you, BDSM, that was not going to be a motive for murder in this case. And how do we know that it would not be a motive for murder? We heard it from Jane's friend, Mrs. Lois Valente, who spoke about some kind of key party in 2009, which would mean that Mrs. Bashara had some knowledge therein. I also looked you in your face, and I'm looking you in your faces again, and I am telling you that Rachel Gillette, that was not going to be anybody's motive for murder. And why is that? Leave, come back, but she always came back. And when Madam Prosecutor spoke to the fact that he couldn't afford to have a wife and Rachel, let me submit this to you after everything you've seen. He could not have Rachel without not only a wife, but that wife that provided the money and the comfort that he had grown accustomed to. Now, you might ask, when all of these women, there are 3 out of them, came up talking about being flogged, talking about all kinds of sex, everything in the world that had nothing to do with this case, why did Lillian Diallo not question not one of them? I had to hand that off to Mr. McCarthy, and from the bottom of my heart, I thank him for that. It was embarrassing, it was humiliating, it was beneath the dignity of a courtroom, but we had to deal with that. And I had to sit there. We had to listen to all kinds of sex acts. That has nothing to do with Mrs. Bashara dying. Nothing. But we listened to it. And listened to it a whole lot. So thank you so very much. And Mrs. Therese Giffen, and remember, we're not the first attorneys on here, but there's always been one prosecution team on here. We didn't have the benefit of seeing these people or knowing these people until they sat up there. Miss Therese Giffen, ex-police officer, ask yourself why. You are talking about grasping at straws. Straws were grasped in this particular case, And I'm going to tell you something else. The prosecution became vested in this case. And I promise you, I had no way of knowing, you suspect, until Ms. Lindsay told us. Who knew that there were meetings with the head prosecutor? Who knew? When you're talking about justice for Jane, that should not equal injustice for Bob. Next slide. Now, if it comes up, it's going to say Joseph Gens. It doesn't even have to come up. I can start without it. Okay. We have Joseph Gens. Joseph Gens, who is, in fact, he's the confessed killer in this particular matter. We have Stephen Tabato, a hitman, or a self-professed hitman, and Stephen Bergona, a friend. Someone said, and I believe it was Ms. Lindsay, that Joe Gens would have no earthly reason to go over to the house. Let's do this. Who said it happened at the house? Who said? See, remember, their theory was predicated upon, and Jimenez was up there, we'll get into this a whole lot later, a leaf being on Mrs. Bashara's foot. That leaf could not match the leaves that were in, as a matter of fact, she said at first, there were no leaves in the alley. Now remember, professional witness, he knows how to testify, he's from elite homicide. Okay. No, he didn't lie. The Supreme Court said you could lie. That's okay. You just wouldn't think they would lie in early. But that's fine. He says that leaf matched, so they determined that scene had to have happened over there in Grosse Pointe some kind of way. Well, and I thank sincerely Captain Locke, because had the leaf been in the prosecutor's possession before, would we be sitting here? I don't know. But you understand, in that garage, what was on her foot did not match what was in the garage. So, who said it happened in the garage now? It's your theory that it happened in the garage. You have the Grosse Pointes, you have all these people out there, yet nobody, not one person that they put on this stand sees that. Okay. Stephen Tabato, hitman extraordinaire. Remember, he's the one that you would go to. If you have a problem with the tenant, have some problems, you come to Stephen Tabato. Stephen Bergona, friend. Remember, that's Joe Gens' friend, and that's the person he went to get him out of trouble before with the police. Now, we have Joseph Gens. And within these relationships of Joseph Gens, you heard talk about rings. You had saw text messages about these rings. What did we not find? You never found the earrings of Mrs. Jane Bashara. Those police officers searched that house on the 27th, and this is experience. This is not somebody that didn't understand. This is Detroit homicide that go into that house and they searched. And what did they get out? They get out a will for proof of residence. The purse had her license in it, but okay, we'll take that. What do you see in the will? You do not see a motive for murder, because within the will that they just put up, Bob can't control anything, not by himself. That's in their house. How is that a motive for murder? Okay, but in any event, we have Mr. Bergona's friend, Mr. Gens, the confessed killer, going to the police whenever, but the police came to him first. They kind of glossed over that one. The police went to Gens first after the letter that was given to to the Grosse Pointe Police Department by the attorney. And that was the letter that was stipulated to. The letter goes in first, and then they come looking for Gens, and then Gens comes to the police station, and he comes to the police station with his friend. He has a scratch on his face. He's the one that allegedly says something about DNA, and they find some DNA. You're going to find DNA. They find that DNA. Okay, so Mr. Pagona is the first person, and I asked him, the first person that said Bob Bashara. He's the first person that put Bob Bashara's name into this whole equation. And part of what he said about why he put Bob Bashara's name into this, you can get a plea deal. This was testified to. It's on the record, and you got to see Mr. Pagona. Next slide. Look, okay, Mr. Tabado. Mr. Tabado comes here, and he testifies. And when I ask him questions, and I hope I'm speaking the English language, he couldn't understand anything I asked. He couldn't read a paper. I had to take him paper. I had to keep getting insulted, being called hun, babe, all of that. Not a problem. You snatched from me. Not a problem. You couldn't read anything on the paper when it was time for me and you to look at this paper. But magically, he could read what the prosecution, whenever they handed him a paper, he understood their questions. What happens with Mr. Tabado that's really important? You hear in that long wire, June 22nd, him having a conversation with Hess. I don't know if they knew it was recorded, but he tells Hess, hopefully I can get him to parlay. So you know there had been a conversation, and it's only, look at the transcript, June 22nd, in the beginning. There's some conversation that we don't know about between Hess and Tabado. And not only that, Mr. Tabado, also unindicted, is the reason why he sits here today. And this would be Bob Bashara. And I'm going to tell you why. Did you hear what they said? Without that piece of evidence, see, you can build on that. You heard those tapes. You heard how Stephen Tabado was talking. You heard how he reeled him in. Were you foolish? Were you stupid? Oh, yeah. You were real stupid and you were real foolish. But listen to this. When you're having these meetings with Judge Worthy, when you're up there, whether you attend or you don't attend, you know what you need to say. You know what you need to at least put out there to make it look like you did something. And when you have 2 years to do it, listen, everybody should be scared behind that one. Because guess who never got to get on that witness stand and look that man in his face and everybody else, you in your face, and tell you what Bob Bashara allegedly did? Joseph Gents.
Objection. The person has the right to remain silent. He has the right to remain silent. He has the right, just like
Judge, no, this was some, if you want me to move on, I can.
Please.
However, please. Okay. Well, in any event, we had to hear through Stephen Vergona what was said. And here's what's telling. You had Detective Jimenez, this elite homicide guy, sat right up there, took the oath. You know he lied to your face one time, and maybe you didn't catch this, but let me help you with this. He says, and we were looking at the leaf, the alleged leaf in this garage. Jimenez. Yes, ma'am. He says, yeah, that was there when we were there on the 27th. Really? I said, well, what about that news photograph, February 8th? Oh, well, it could have been. That's okay. You think that's of no consequence and of no moment? That leaf was a vital part of this case and of Grosse Pointe keeping jurisdiction. And guess what else? When they say that Detroit was not involved with this, they were involved from day one with Olson, who got up there, looked you in your face and said, there's only one way that, people grieve. Oh, really? Well, let me tell you. As someone that has lost a mother and a father a year apart, unexpectedly, you do not have a book for dealing with that. I was in court. My mother passed Sunday. That Monday, I'm in front of a court of law, standing there. And if you think I didn't feel that, you have another thought coming. You cannot dictate one individual how anybody responds and reacts. But that's the arrogance of this investigation. It's the arrogance of their position. Their sights were set on Bob. And yeah, it helped that he had all kind of crazy sex, freaky sex, you know, what does that have to do? So had he told the truth about having an affair on the 27th, he wouldn't have to sit here? You say that shows you're guilty because you're having an affair and your wife is killed? They are wrong. Okay. This is what we get from that wire that Stephen Tabado had. And this is in evidence. From Mr. Bashara. This happens June the 19th, 2012, part 1. Came over to my house looking for money. You heard this from Mr. Bashara. And you know, Mr. Bashara didn't know he was being recorded because they made a great big deal about him patting him down. He didn't know he was being recorded. Okay. I gave him I put power in his name, okay? His power in my name, so he got his Edison bill cleared out. He's never even paid it. They shut him off, so he's pissed off about that. And what you have to remember, ladies and gentlemen, at this time, Mr. Bashar was represented by counsel. We're not all yoked the same, but we can all have attorney at law if we pass that bar. But that's okay. Then next, I put power in my name. I helped give him little odd jobs, okay? And then he fucking comes over to my house desperately, runs across my wife, hasn't been taking his medicine, and fucking blows up and kills her, and then he throws me under the bus and names me to get off. You watch. He's going to plead down to second-degree murder and 20 years as opposed to life. It's going down. What he's saying, and what they want you to gloss over in that, this is out of Mr. Bashara's mouth. He told you what was going to happen. He didn't say, hey, I got to kill him before it happens. He's saying it's going to happen. It is going to happen. It's going down. And why would somebody be offended at that? Well, a couple of reasons you could be offended. You allegedly, now this is their theory, come to the house. This is the prosecution's theory. And this happened. I'm not so sure, and we'll talk about that later. Next, please. Here's some more of that wire. And boy, did we get to hear a whole lot of Mr. Bashara. But in any event, Mr. Bashara, look it, Steve, here's the deal. I didn't kill my wife. I didn't pay Joe to do it. I didn't hire Joe to do it. He's an idiot. Got right there. Now, this is a little thing, but this is how you know they work together to string this case up. They say that, I believe Ellington said he called him a fucking retard, or I don't know, because that's derogatory, right? Whenever you hear on these tapes, Mr. Bashara, any of those calls, you don't hear him saying that. But that's okay. We can put that together because we're the power of the people. But in any event, you think I'm going to hire him to kill my wife in my garage when I'm in town? You think I would actually do something like that, the mother of my children? You have a fucking thought coming if you think I'm capable. Now, see, all the prosecutor wanted you to key in on is when I'm in town. I guess what they're trying to say is he wanted this done when he was out of town. I don't know. But you got to put it all together. You cannot live in a vacuum. You got to look at it all. You got to listen to it all. Next slide, please. Mr. Tabado, Gans is going to cut a deal. He already is. He's testifying against me. He's cutting a deal against me. I'm telling you, hey. And you know, we have some of these exhibits, and one of the last defense exhibits entered was the Register of Actions with Joe Gentz's history of this case that started in March. So this has not been something that was new and coming. But who had the pressure in June? Who turned that pressure up because they knew what they had to do? Because the competency, remember, the prosecution knows about this competency. It's their case. They turned it up. And that's when you start seeing Steve Tabado hit the scene. And ask yourself this. Ask yourself this. Steve Tabado, you hear him him talking to Thena. And what he's saying is, okay, well, the place right there, we got to shut things down, you know, do things a little differently, something along those lines. What is he doing over there? Who knows? Who cares? But I tell you this, the man got, what, 2, 1, 2, 3 guns, or I don't know, a knife, another unindicted person. Because I don't know, how many guns can you carry with a CPL? I just thought it was one. But hey, new rules, new people. Okay, go ahead. Okay. Here you go. Next screen. This is the June 22nd wire. And this is if you go and you get this exhibit, I would welcome you to get that. And please read from the beginning where you hear the conversation between him and Hess talking about getting it all together because they have a plan. They've been meeting. They know what they need to do to put Mr. Bashara in that chair. And they use the willing Mr. Tabaro. Mr. Bada boom, bada bing, I can get me a grenade launcher. That's okay. We'll go back to him. So he tells, Mr. Bashara says, going to cut a deal and go after me. Anything you can do to help me. Now, is he saying, hey, I killed my wife? He don't know he's being recorded. I killed her, yeah, I did. I messed up. I hired this. You will never hear that on any of these tapes that he didn't know were being recorded. You're not going to hear it. I'm innocent, okay? This Gintz either acted alone or had someone else help him, but not me. Why would I want to kill my wife? There's no reason to. She was making $125 a year. Her and I got along great. And how do you know that's true? From the witnesses that you better believe by now, if they don't hate him, I don't know why not, because you hear about all this disgusting sex. He's been muddied up, dirtied up, everywhere he can be dirtied up. And speaking of dirtying up and not listening to this case, and that's what, just listen to the case. When we first got started, when Mrs. Lindsay was talking to Rachel Gillette, she said something that kind of made the hair on my neck stand up. She said something about Rachel Gillette or Bob Bashara using the N-word. Ask yourself why in the world that was relevant. I'll tell you why it was relevant. So you wouldn't listen, you'd be offended and insulted. And you're not going to listen to the case. But guess what? On none of those tapes that you hear Mr. Bashara saying that, calling anybody the N-word. Well, we do know Joseph Gintz did, and we'll go back to that later. Now, Mr. Bashara, I know, let me tell you that this defense attorney he's got is partnering up with the prosecution to throw me under the bus. They're going to cut a deal and go after me. Look just like a prophet. He didn't lie about that. Next screen. Now here's Mr. Stephen Regona. Stephen Regona is another one of the unindicted. Let me tell you why Stephen Regona is unindicted. He was under, you heard them, subpoena to bring documents to the prosecutor's office. He never brought them. There's no penalty because he helped them. He helped them in their goal. And then, and I'm talking to just Mr. Tabaro a little bit. He's another one. Now, he sat there and committed perjury. You know how he did that? Day one, he's testifying. He goes, no, Joe just had big feet. He just, he's kicking, he got things in the way. He got in the way. He's kicking them because he had big feet. Day two, we go to the transcript where he testified under oath before. And I said, well, Mr. Tabaro, in the transcript it says he worked for you and you had to let him go because he was kicking stuff around and using the N-word. Okay, so if I can get this straight, the theory is you're going to prosecute crimes, right? Because that's what you're here to do. But guess what? Perjury is only perjury if the prosecutor says it so. They have the power to charge it, not us. You understand? So you can get up on that stand, you can lie like a rug, whatever. If they don't charge it, it's not so. It's unfortunate, but that's the way the law goes. But in any event, Mr. Regona, he goes to the police on the 30th, and he tells them that he talks to Jimenez and never mentions Bob Bashara's name. And I went through this whole thing with Detective Jimenez. I said, Detective, you know how to take a statement. You know how to write a police report. You know the purpose of writing a police report. It's not whether you have on red shoes or blue shoes, you have on underwear, no underwear. You know the purpose of writing a police report. We went over what he put in there, what Joe Gintz told him. Nowhere in that first statement was Bob Bashara's name mentioned. But guess what Steve Regona does say? He says that you can cut a deal, Joe. You cut a deal, a plea deal. And guess what he did? He cut a plea deal, and his friend helped him. He helped him, and he was in communication with Mr. Gintz. And guess what we found out, sitting in this trial? That on the 24th, they were together. Stephen Regona and Joe Gintz were together. And what else did we find out? That just happened. I'm looking at the back of the check that Mr. Simona had cashed at the party store for Joe. On the back of that check, I'm thinking maybe it's Joe Gintz's name, or one of his nicknames is JJ. Joe Gintz, okay. JJ is a whole different person. Up until that time, I did not know that. Okay, that's fine. Maybe it means something, maybe it doesn't. What else do we find out? JJ was with him, and that would be Joe Gintz on the 24th. That was testimony on that stand. Okay. And I remember asking ATF agent Drew, and we can get more into him in a bit, a couple of questions. They were hammering about this text message that was sent 12:10 to one of the women that Mr. Gintz was in communication with. Hun, if you know somebody's going to do something to somebody, where do you go? What do you do? I have to watch my ass. Okay. And then you're saying you talked to Mr. Bashara before that, after, whenever, I think it was before. And from that right there, that's how you know that Bob Bashara hired him or wanted him to kill Jane Bashara. The 12:17 text message that Stan Brew testified to was between, he had to come back, remember he testified 3 times. He had to come back. 12:17, there was a text message talking between Regona and Gintz. Something about Letty being dead and the Hartel brothers dead. I asked the ATF agent Brew, is that something you would been interested in? Oh, absolutely. What didn't they do? They didn't get his phone records. Steve Regona, and we have that because remember, 12:10 is closer in time to, 12:17 is closer in time to 12:10 than 1:24. You didn't investigate that angle because it did not fit with the group meetings that you were having. What else does Stephen Regona say? Who knew? He said that he had to get a lawyer to cover himself. What do you mean? Before you talk to the police, you said it's in the record, you have to get a lawyer to cover yourself. What the heck do you need covering for? I don't, before anything, why do you need covering? You didn't do anything wrong, right? You just with this alleged hapless Joe Gintz, what do you need a lawyer for? Okay, that's okay. And then, next one.
Wait a minute, before we start, let's take a stretch break. Stand up.
Well,
You may be seated.
okay. And before we get off to Mr. Regona and Joseph Gintz, you know, you might look at me and go, I remember that. I read this into the record. This was under oath testimony. It's not a but this was a question by Miss Lindsay at an investigative subpoena in 2012, May 18th. Miss Lindsay to Steve Regona. Okay, now you also, they say in a newspaper article from March the 5th, 2002, given to the Detroit News, they indicate that you said that you brought Joe in to the witness. Mr. Begoma says, yes. Ms. Lindsay, next question. What did you mean by that? The witness, well, what I meant is, yeah, I didn't want to say too much of a statement in front of the police department because I was going to get talked to a lawyer myself. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I absolutely guarantee you and promise you, if what I told you to your face was a lie, somebody would have been up by now. That's what was stated on this record. Why? All right, now, let's go to Joseph Gass for the bottom. Joe just showed up at Steve's Furniture one day. And I asked him, what do you mean? He just showed up. Uninvited. Raconin. Joe just showed up at her place of employment at 11 p.m. Now look, you got to see Miss Raconin, okay? She came in here. My first time ever meeting her in life. Listen, and I don't say this lightly, and I don't believe in talking about people. I was scared of her. Okay? And guess what? She was scared of Jens. Because she told you how he tried to get her down some dark street, some direction-wise. But that's okay. Now, and then this is something B introduced. You know, we're talking about full and fair prosecution, full and fair process. You heard ad nauseum, allegedly from Baracco and anybody else that was Joe's friend, okay, about this $5,000. And that's the same $5,000 that they attributed to Bob Bashara. Although none of the communications that you saw from Bob Bashara and Mr. Gentz held that up. But trust me, it's our theory and it's absolutely right. Because we can never be wrong about anything. Introduced, it's a defense exhibit, and I don't know if it's D, E, F, but it's one of them. On 1/20/2012, there is a $5,000 deposit into Gentz's account at the Chase Bank from, guess who? Letty Gentz, the stepmother. Guess what he said? She was dead 12/17. Not charged with that. All right. Then, on 1/24/2012, that deposit was rejected by Chase Bank. Listen. How in the world would Bob Bashara know that? How would he know that? He wouldn't. And this $5,000 amount, there it is right there for you. And remember, there's a custody battle going on and all of that. I believe that was into the record. Things were heating up in that custody battle. And by, I believe, January 31st or 30th or something, he was going to have a trial on that issue. Okay. So on 1/24, when that check is rejected by Chase Bank, allegedly, Gentz just shows up at 552 Middlesex. He goes there on the same day that this check is returned. But this is supposedly the same day that Bob tells him, hey, get it done. Look at those phone records. You tell me where you see a call anywhere close in time to when allegedly there was some contact at that Middlesex address between Gentz and Bob Bashara. It's not there. Okay. So is this your theory? And I got to thinking about it. And when you talk about this leak thing, and I'm looking at her clothes, she had on something I would wear if I'm running out the house. House shoes, socks, because my feet get cold. And not going far though. Some pants, top, and a coat. Say this. Maybe this, how about trying this theory? What if Mrs. Bashara is leaving the house as Joe Gentz is coming up to the house? We know that that seat is pushed back. And where is JJ, by the way? They didn't investigate that. That's okay, because his name isn't Bob Bashara. And whatever happens, happens, but not at that house. Because the only thing that makes you know is that house from them is the leak. Look in that garage. You look. And I had to listen to that very disturbing evidence about this big, huge man accosting that woman. And they said, they showed you the boot, the left boot, the right boot, there's potential DNA. Okay. Look in that garage. Do you see any impression of a boot in that garage? And they had all the resources in the world. Do you see any of that? Do you see blood? That you see her face? You see her. Do you see any of that going on in that garage? What makes it the garage is the leaf. And it makes it the garage because it's convenient. And, you know, you're saying, oh my goodness, it had to happen there. How do we know that? And see, this may be something that you might be uncomfortable with because of all the sullying and the dirtying and the he's a bad guy, he owes everybody a life, he doesn't pay everybody what he owes them, slow pay with Steve Tomato, slow pay if you're a little bit against, wrong person. Who said it happened? Who said that? And if you don't know, you don't fill in the blanks. You're not, that's what you said you couldn't do. That's their job. If you don't know it happened there, that's not guilty. That's their theory. And you heard Jimenez get up on that stand and just tell you because I know how to testify. You think that they didn't all come together, and Ms. Lindsay told you that. They all came together and decided, Ms. Bob, and you give Joe Gents the consideration that I know I couldn't get in a murder. A murder that brutal, that's okay. Because guess what? We're going to keep him dirty. We're going to keep him filthy. We're going to keep him wallowing in the filth so you don't listen to this. None of this stuff came out at first. Of course, you know, there's a gag order. You can't talk about anything. By the time we get, the defense gets the case. So, well, no, that's not there. That's not there. But it's out there. Once information is out there it stays. And then you always find yourself going, well, it was in the media, it's in print media, it was there. Okay, well, Ms. Lindsay can even agree. They get it wrong sometimes. And if you only get your information from one source, one-sided information, it's not going to work out. Next word. Then lastly, and then I'm really going to leave you guys alone. We had ATF agents stand through. Now see, they tried to skew it. You know, he works for them, and all this data compilation, it comes from their eye on Bob. Okay? So, from 8/1/11 through 1/31/12, there were 15,378 calls by Bob Bashara. That's a lot of calls. That's a chatty Cathy, but that's okay. The most calls were to Rachel Gillette, number one, followed by Jane Bashara, followed by Robert Fick, followed by Joe Gets. Now, do you ask yourself, you wonder what might have happened to some of these witnesses when we weren't around? Because you know they were on their best behavior in this courtroom. You wonder what they might have told Bob Fick, look, your numbers in these records a whole lot. Did you do something? Who knows? Okay. But the DNA wouldn't tie Fick to it. Gents would tie. The DNA would tie Gents to it. Gents called Bob 2/3 of the time during 2011. Now, here's where Stan Brewer is important. And remember, he was here 3 times because he was such an expert. Calls can be deflected from a busy tower to a less busy tower. What did Special Agent Hess, I guess it was him, get up there and say, nope, can never ever happen? Oh, really? Okay. If you don't think that they all came together to get Bob Bashara, he got another thing coming. Cannot say if all those calls connected. Now, when we're talking about all those calls, we're talking about calls to guests, especially those of short duration. So when you see all these little pieces of time on there, you can't say if they're connected. You can say there was a call, and you might think they're connected when you look at the time. Time can send you to voicemail time, but little bitty calls, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, you can't say those are connected, and that's what Stan Bruce said. And also, he says calls sent to a busy cell tower can be redirected to a less busy tower, and that's in reference to his trial testimony. And we did get a transcript, thanks to the prosecutor, of Stan Bruce's testimony, in case you're wondering. And those are things that he said from his trial testimony. You just can't remember everything in a trial this length. Okay, next please. So, this was exhibit number 23 that was introduced by the prosecution. Once again, from 8/1/11 to 1/31/12, a whole lot of calls in excess of 15,000. 1,000 of those were to Richard Gillette, 775 to Bob Bashara, 652 to Robert Fick, and 472 to Joseph Gibbs. So when you know everything that you got was a summary of their argument, of what their eye is looking for. What all the rest of them call? Who do they go to? But it doesn't matter. Next, please. This is from exhibit number 29. In October 2011, Bob made 54 calls to Gibbs. November 2011, 65 calls to Gibbs. December 2011, 20 calls to Gibbs. And in January, 66 calls to Gibbs. The actual number of calls from Bob to Gibbs is consistent during October, November, and January. December being a holiday month. Okay. But remember what Stan Brew got up there and said? He said, you see a sharp inflection. You see something sharp there in the calls, the dropping pattern, the calling pattern. You see it because you want to see it. And what else did we not see from Stan Brew? Now, you talked about that text message. I'm sorry, not text message, phone voicemail that Joseph Gibbs allegedly sends. Oh, no, not alleged. He sends to Mr. Bashara. Where is that? They have the technology. They have the resources. Where is that? They get everything else. Where are the phone records? Come on, somebody help me with all these people. You only get what makes Bob look guilty. You don't get anything to make him not look guilty because that's not their job. Now, Stan Brew. Okay. This is a question that came right from the trial transcript when he got right up on this stand, took oath, and looked at you. Okay, so I believe what you're saying is that the phone can interact with any of those towers, correct? His response answer. Let's just say, for instance, if I were at Hoover and 8 Mile, and I were to make a call, I would interact with either the gray, the blue, or the yellow. And those are sectors, because those 3 sectors are designed to service the area, which includes 8 and Hoover. Correct. The question, correct. And just, they're designed to service that area, correct? And his response, yes, ma'am. I believe that was questioning by the court. I believe so, but in any event, that's what he said. So, and I think I remember asking him, you can't say that one cell phone was next to the other. Cannot say that. But you can say it could have been in that sector interacting with any of those towers. That's all you can say. You can't, this is smoke and mirrors. This is what this is. You just want to put everything in that's one-sided and slanted, and that's your job. But you're vested. You are invested in this process, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is wrong. Now, Mr. McCarthy, he got a little more to say to you, but I just wanted to look at you and look you in your face because I'm not lying to you. I told you things as I saw them. And we saw something that I can tell you never seen it before. And I've had the pleasure, and I say the pleasure, of trying the case before Ms. Lindsay, Mr. Moran, and Mr. Muscat.
And what about Mr. Hinterland?
Hey, Mr. Hinterland. Hey, he's new on the scene. I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but, I've had the pleasure of working with this young man. Normally, it's the defense's job to point out that the investigation is bad. You understand that there are lapses in the investigation. Bad investigation is the death knell of the prosecutor. Ms. Lindsay got up here in front of God and everybody.
You gotta speak up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Let's I'm gonna take a stretch break one more time. We got a lot of information. We're gonna stop at 4:10, so just take your time. It's okay. Please stand up. You may be seated.
Okay, I'm sorry. When Detective Narduzzi got up on that scene, who knew? You never would have known that. You never would have seen that. I don't know, but you saw it. And you saw the passion that was displayed. You saw whatever the word is that first guy used. I think that was the word that might have covered what we saw. It was where I'm so vested in this process. You messed the investigation up. And let me tell you, this was not, you just can't put that in Grosse Point's lap. They didn't have the experience, but guess who did? Miss Lindsay's team had the experience. She's on this case extremely early. Okay? She not only is on this case, she has the full resources of the government, that the Wayne County government, seems like, at her disposal. You had Detroit police executing search warrants, getting search warrants signed by judges. Because you say, okay, this is what I say. And they sign it, you go in. You have that. And when I listened to what I heard, I was uncomfortable. I don't know if in my history of trying cases, I've ever got nothing objected to a berating of a police officer. It's just, it was too much for me. But you saw it. Had you not have seen it, would you have listened to us when we told you that this investigation was messed up? Would you have listened to us? Would you have listened when we said that you went after Bob Bashara to the exclusion of all others? What in the, I'm cussing, I'm sorry. What in the hell do you mean you are police officers with guns and badges, and because somebody's uncooperative, they don't get interviewed anymore? Nothing else is done? What about his car? Well, does anybody know anything? Well, he was not cooperative. Well, listen, and I'm going to leave you with this. Miss Lindsay, she very good attorney. She talked to you about the Bible. Let me talk to you about the police officers. They know their power. They know their power in front of the jury. And you know they know their power. Their power. We have situations going on all over this country where it tells you they know their power. Now, I don't know what went on with this because I didn't see it, but I know what went on with I can't breathe, and still you walk. Still you're out there. Because you know why? They know their power. They can get up there and say whatever they want. If that's what they're so inclined to, and that's fine. And let me tell you something else. I'm not knocking police officers because all of them aren't bad. There are some damn fine officers that I've run across right here in Detroit, contrary to popular belief. Some of the best officers you're ever going to find, I believe, in this country. But when they're not cooperative, when they set their sights on you, hey, guess what? Can't breathe.
Let's take a straight break.
I'm sorry.
You may be seated. The important thing finish that up tomorrow, and then we're gonna go straight into jury instructions, and then remember, 4 of you will be eliminated tomorrow. Okay, very good. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor, and thank you, Ms. Diallo. The next thing that I wanted to touch upon is the generosity. You know, Ms. Lindsay mentioned something about Mr. Bashara being a person of a certain class, living there in Grosse Pointe, being the president of the Rotary, having a father who was a judge, and somehow or another that would remove him from all suspicion. Well, that doesn't line up squarely or at all with the reality of the fact that by the 27th of January, it was officially out of the bag that Bob Bashara was the suspect in this case. So whatever mileage he might have gotten out of the fact that he lived on Middlesex Street in Grosse Pointe Park, or the fact that his now deceased father was a judge at one time in history, or that he used to be the president of the Rotary, none of that mattered anymore, and none of it should matter, because all people should be equal under the law. The only thing is, those people should all be treated fairly. Now, you know, there's talk about Bob manipulating people, grooming people. And in thinking about that, I thought about this fellow, Ralph Lee. Ralph Lee testified early on in the trial back in October, and he said that, you know, he was a handyman. He lived in one of Bob's apartments, and he went to Bob to get a place to live back in 2003 when he was in trouble with the law over a serious crime, some sort of a sex offense, and then he was going to have to go to jail. And then when he got out, because he was a sex offender, he was going to have to live a certain distance away from schools and couldn't be around children, and there was these restrictions going to be placed upon him. But Robert Bashara said, well, okay, I'll give you a place to live. I'll help you. I'll give you some work. And that's what he did. And Ralph Lee was still his tenant, was still his handyman in 2012 when Bob ended up being arrested. So along comes Joe Gentz. The whole idea here in this conspiracy is that Bob, the mastermind, sees this guy who's down on his luck and needs a place to live and is grooming him to become a killer. Now, how's he going to even know that Joe Gentz is going to be down for killing somebody? I mean, that just seems preposterous. But in the prosecution's theory, that's the idea. So, yeah, he helps him. If you want to call it help, he takes him over there to Rebecca Fortin, for whom he's acting as the agent, and it ends up that through his sales pitch, Ms. Fortin says, yeah, that's all right. Joe Gentz has got a guaranteed income because he's getting SSI or some other kind of a Social Security payment that's going to be direct deposited to her, so she's going to get paid. She's not going to have to worry about where his money's coming from. And with that in mind, she says, yeah, that's okay, he can live there. Bob helps him by putting the utilities in his name to get him started. Is he doing something because he's grooming Joe Gentz to go out and commit a crime? Or is he doing what he had done 9 years before, or 8 years before with Ralph Lee? He helped somebody out. He helped this guy Monroe out. He let him have a place even though he was a felon. And apparently Thomas Ramsey the same. He's being fair-minded. And that goes with what he did in the bigger community. This is what he's doing in his everyday life, giving these little people who have trouble a break. Then he's the president of the Rotary. Yeah, that's a big deal. And to him, he's something he's very proud of. But the Rotary activities in which he was involved were generosity. It was raising money for people that needed it. That £3 million challenge that Mr. Carmody had to reluctantly acknowledge was Bob's idea, and he put a lot of effort into it, even though he and the rest of the Rotarians had made Bob a non-person by this time. That was Bob doing it. It was his idea, and then he saw it through to the end. In this business, you know, that Mr. McSkimming talked about, and also Bob's relatives acknowledged when they testified, and the other people that knew him over at St. Michael's Episcopal Church, he raised money there. He did that willingly. He did fundraising activities for his daughter's school there, and this place where his son went, Grosse Pointe South. He was active in doing those kinds of things because he thought it was the right thing to do. So when, you know, Special Agent O'Riordan says that it's weird, or it's odd, or it's ridiculous, or however, whatever conclusion he wanted you to draw from, Bob Bashara saying, you know, I'm the president of the Rotary, and he's pointing to this Rotary pin. If he had it on that day, I'm not sure, but at least he's talking about that. And he's saying, not, I couldn't possibly be charged with a crime because I'm the president of the Rotary, and not, he's not talking like he's some pompous, self-important person like Mr. Carmody. He's saying, you're asking me about killing my wife. You're asking me whether I'm a murderer. Or somehow or another put somebody else up to doing this. You're suspecting me. I've lived my whole life doing good things, not bad things for the world. He doesn't tell them, yeah, well, I'm into this weird sex thing, and I got a girlfriend on the side. I'll acknowledge that. Because he's not perfect. And none of us are. But when he's talking to, you know, and in all fairness to Marco Reardon, the special agent from the Secret Service, he doesn't know all this background when he sits down to talk to Mr. Bashara. But we now know that background. And if you consider those statements that he made about being he says, I suspect me. I don't do that kind of a thing. That's what he meant. That's what he was saying. And then, you know, this whole lifetime of doing good out in the community has to count for something. Is a person who's going to do those kind of things, are they going to be motivated to kill? Be involved in a brutal, horrible killing? Doesn't seem like it. But could a guy get strung out? Be overpressured? Make bad judgments? 4 or 5 months later? Get himself hooked up with Steve Cabato? And stupidly arrange or attempt to arrange for a hit on the guy that he thinks is throwing him under the bus and going to frame him? And who he would like to get some revenge against because he killed his wife? Yeah, he did that. And here's another thing that he did. He went into court and he pled guilty when he did that. Because that's a crime that he actually did commit. And we have up until 2012, Bob's not in any trouble in his life at all. In terms of any kind of conviction. Doesn't have one. But in 2012, he did acknowledge that he was a guilty man in the hit on Joe Gantz case. But in 2014, he was in trial because his plea is not guilty. Let's see the next. Lastly, I want to finish about what Jane had to say. You know, we have Jessica Bashara talked about her mother telling her that she was happy with her marriage. In the spring of 2011, Bob and she went to Hawaii together with the Matthews, and they had a wonderful time, and she said, saved my marriage. She was happy. In 2011, in August, Stephanie Samuel is having a garage sale with Jane Bashara, and she says, afterwards, you know, they're having a beer together when the day of sale is over with, and she says, we have a great relationship. Yes, there's been some rocky patches along the way. We've been to counseling. Things are good. In 2011, in January, Jane writes, and this is exhibit number 35, she writes this thing out that says, why we fight. Now look at this. This is her handwriting. She has no idea that anyone would ever look at what she was writing. This is her talking to herself a year before she dies. She says, Bob makes plans, and he doesn't tell me. Bob says he says things that he doesn't. I can't trust what he says, and Bob says things without talking to me, ... selling the house, ... going out with the guys. Is that something extraordinary? Is that any different than the average married couple may encounter in the course of 25 or 26 years of marriage, where there's going to be those ups and downs along the way, and you're going to have some things that happen, your communication breaks down a little bit, and then she says, well, you know, he's making these plans, but he doesn't include me, he doesn't tell me what's going on. And I can't trust what he says, because he says things without talking to me. He's talking about selling a house, but he's not including her. He's going to go out with the guys, he doesn't tell her. These are everyday kind of problems people run across. You got to work your way through that. So they go to counseling. And she tells that to Stephanie in August. Yeah, things are really great. And then we've got her friend Lois Valente. Lois Valente, of all the friends that we had testimony from, Patricia Matthews, Deborah Breen, Eileen Stradilek, Roxanne Flaska. Debbie Breen's the only Lois Valente is the only person that she ever reveals the sexual oddness about Bob. She says he's into some weird things. She gives some details. She didn't do that with Patricia Matthews, but she did it with Lois Valente. Yeah, he wanted to go to this key party. Lois Valente is an innocent lamb. She doesn't even know what that's all about, so it had to be explained. And Jane is embarrassed by this. But they're close friends, and she shares that with her. And this is in 2009 or 2010. I told Bob he can do what he wants to do. Well, if that's true, and we have no reason to believe that it isn't, then he had the fitness teeth and he ran with it, rightly or wrongfully. But nevertheless, that's what happened. And then we get down 10 days before June. 10 days. The 14th of January in 2012.
Keep your voice up, please.
Yes, 14th of January in 2012, while Bob is in Oregon. Jane and Lois have lunch together. And Jane talks about the status of their marriage and the status of their relationship. And she says to his friend who she has shared intimate things before, she says, I prayed about it. And I reflected on it. And I decided that we did it before. We built up substantial wealth together. And that we can do that again. She's going to stay with Bob. She didn't want to be part of a divorce. And that was her frame of mind. That's what she was thinking. What she expressed to her close friend 10 days before his death. This man was going to benefit from continuing to be married to Jane Bashara, the loyal wife who is his partner, in spite of his peccadillos, in spite of his own, perhaps, moral shortcomings and his infidelities. She has no desire to end her marriage. She loves her husband. She's staying with him. Where is the motive for him to kill her? Why would he hurt a hair on her head? As Mrs. Diallo pointed out to you, all those times he's being recorded, he never says anything like that. And he doesn't know that. When he's on all those jail calls and he talks about, forever and ever and ever, he talks and talks and talks, you never hear anything like that. He never said anything like that because there would be no reason to say something. He didn't do it. I didn't kill my wife. That's what he said repeatedly. And we've seen these television clips, and he gave interviews, and did he tell the truth about the BDSM? No, he didn't. But as I said before, your determination, when the 12 of you speak in a unified voice, is going to be determined the difference between what really is and what merely seems to be. Now, I'm going to sit down in just a second. Now, tomorrow, you're finally going to get the case, and it'll be up to the 12 of you to decide what the real truth of this entire unfortunate episode has been. It is. And Mrs. Diallo and I, we've done everything we can do for Robert Bashara. We've done our honest best to present the best defense we know how, so that you all will be able to take those arguments, consider the evidence that's been presented in this crime, find out for yourselves whether there is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And remember this, as Judge Evans is going to tell you tomorrow, a reasonable doubt is just that. It's a doubt based on reason and common sense. by looking at the evidence or the lack of evidence. And I submit to you, as I said in the beginning, there are big gaps in the evidence. There's a lack of evidence here. And nothing proves that he intended, first of all, conspired to kill James Bashara, conspired with Joe Gentz, solicited Joe Gentz to kill James Bashara, aided and abetted Joe Gentz in the first-degree murder of James Bashara. And did he really obstruct justice? Because he tried to find witnesses who would support him when he was a free man? Did he really obstruct justice when he offered Robert Fick a ride down to the investigative subpoena? Did he really obstruct justice when he's talking to Will Schatz and asking him to give him a letter of support, which Schatz did, now relents or kind of rejects and says, "Oh no, I got forced into doing that"? Is that what he was doing? I ask you on behalf of Bob Bashara to return the verdicts that are fair and just based on the evidence and the lack of evidence in this case. 1 through 5, not guilty. Thank you for all the attention and the sacrifice you've made to be with us during these past 10 weeks. Thank you for the devotion you've brought to always showing up every day and being a part of this very important case, important to the people of the state of Michigan and important to Robert Bashara. Thank you for being a part of the third part of our government, the judiciary. And I know that you're going to do the right thing. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you. Okay, the van will be here at 4:15. See you bright and early 9:30. Now remember, wait a minute. No, just hold on. Okay. This will happen if you forget what you're gonna say. Okay, here we go. All right. Don't watch TV or anything. 9:30. The people have 55 minutes. Take a little break. Then I'm going to give you my instructions. Those are instructions that you have to follow. That's the law. They're in your notebooks. And you'll be able to take those notebooks back. 4 of you will be eliminated. And I anticipate that will be before lunch. Because after we do the 55 minutes, take a 15-minute break. I'm going to give you those instructions. Then we're going to eliminate 4 of you, break for lunch, and then you begin your deliberation. So this may be the last day, well, tomorrow, the last day that you will be with your fellow jurors. Knock on the door when you're ready to go. All rise for the jury. All rise for